Almost 2 years ago, I started up a petition on change.org for Sony to save the PlayStation TV microconsole by giving it 100% Vita compatibility. Since then, that petition has garnered over 900 supporters, and its accompanying YouTube video has received nearly 1,000 likes and close to 30,000 views. Quite a lot has happened since then. In fact, what I'm about to tell you is rather old news, but I am happy to confirm that while Sony still hasn't answered our cries, those of us in the Vita community now have our wish half granted. Not by Sony, but by the hacking community. After a full year of being locked out of the PlayStation network via the PSTV, it is finally safe to update to the latest firmware and still be able to play all Vita games. For those new to the situation, the PlayStation TV, or PlayStation Vita TV as it's known in Japan, is a microconsole that enables you to play Vita games on your television. Unlike its predecessor, the PlayStation Portable, the PlayStation Vita has no way of outputting audio and video to a TV. Sony's answer to this was the PlayStation TV. For all intents and purposes, this is a Vita stripped of its touchscreen, rear touchpad, microphone, camera, and gyroscope. While the touch functions could be emulated using a DualShock 3 or DualShock 4, and some motion features could be simulated with a DualShock 4's gyro, Sony blacklisted a large number of games that use these features. Try to play a game that's not on the whitelist and you'll get an error message. In September 2015, a hacker called Mr. Gas released an exploit that enables gamers to overwrite the PSTV's whitelist so any game will load. Basically, you create a new Gmail account, sync it to Mozilla Thunderbird, and then sync it with your PlayStation TV's email application. You send yourself the exploit files and then open them via the PSTV. This enables any Vita game to load on the PSTV. As you can see, I have Spy Hunter on the PSTV. If I try to play the game, it won't boot up. No problem, I just go into the emailing system, open up the first email, and then open its attachment. Then I press the home button and take me back to the home page without closing the file. Then I close the email app completely. I then open the email app again, access the second email, click on its attachment, and then I close the attachment as normal. Now, lo and behold, Spy Hunter boots up perfectly, and the game plays just fine. Later in July 2016, a group of hackers calling themselves Team Molecule released a homebrew enabling software called HENkaku, specifically for use with the Vita or PSTV running on firmware 3.60. This software essentially gives you access to the PSTV's root files and allows you to transfer various applications from your PC to your Vita via an FTP client, such as FileZilla. And of course, if you want to overwrite the whitelist, there's an app for that. This may seem scary and overcomplicated, but it actually ends up being easier to install than the old whitelist. Obviously, the first thing you want to do is download the application to your computer. It's labelled as whitelister.vpk. Just download it to a folder on your desktop where you know you'll find it, and install FileZilla. Now on your PSTV, before you do anything, I recommend you make a backup using QCMA, just in case anything goes wrong. As you can see, I'm running 3.52 and have 2 digital blacklisted games that play perfectly fine running the old whitelist hack. What I'm going to do now is update to 3.60. As expected, now that I've updated to 3.60, those blacklisted games no longer load. Not to panic, I go into the internet browser app and type in henkaku.xyz and hit the install button. If you get any error messages or your console freezes, don't panic, just hard reboot the console and try again. When you see this screen, just hit OK, and it will begin installing the Molecular Shell app. Once the installation is completed, you'll see there is a new bubble for Molecular Shell. This will basically take you to the PSTV's root folders. Press the select button and it will bring up your IP address and port number. Back on your computer with FileZilla, copy the IP address number where it says host and the port number where it says port. Then hit Quick Connect. On the left side of your screen you have the root folders for your PC, and on the right side you have the PSTV's root folders. Now on the PSTV side of the screen you want to select the UX0 folder. Then on your PC side of the screen, navigate to the folder where you saved your Whitelist VPK file. Select the file and upload it. Hey, it worked! It's copied over to the PSTV's root folder. Now back on the PSTV, simply close this window and navigate to the UX0 folder. You'll find the whitelister.vpk file exactly where you uploaded it. Simply select the file and hit yes to install it. Once it's finished installing, go back to the live area and you should see a new bubble for it. Open it up like you would any normal game. And you're done! Now the blacklisted games will boot up on 3.60. However, Sony patched up both of these methods using firmware updates, which thus prevented gamers from installing the whitelist hack and disabled it if they updated the live area after updating the firmware. To Sony's credit, the whitelist hack were not the only exploit files that you could send yourself. Both the failmail and HENkaku opened the doors for potentially shady applications, such as installing emulators for Nintendo games. But for those of us who just wanted to play all Vita games, we were kinda screwed. While you could keep the PSTV on outdated firmware, we were locked out of the PlayStation network via the PlayStation TV, because the latest firmware is required to access it. Want to do online multiplayer? Too bad, you're locked out. Want to sync your trophies? Can't do it without updating. Want to buy games online? Too bad, you can't access the store. Want to use PS4 Remote Play? Tough luck. Of course, there were some workarounds. Games for the Vita could be purchased and downloaded to the PlayStation 3. And so using the software's QCMA and Vita Update Blocker, it was possible to trick the PSTV into thinking it was on the latest firmware, and in doing so, we could transfer digital Vita games from the PlayStation 3 to the PSTV without updating to the latest firmware. But newer Vita games will inevitably require later firmware to install, even if they are PSTV compatible. The only workaround was to purchase a second PlayStation TV, update it to the latest firmware, and hope the game you wanted to play was compatible. I purchased a second device for just that purpose, but fortunately I never got around to setting it up, because now we finally have a better alternative. We now have a whitelist hack that will work on any Vita firmware, and we no longer have to live in fear of being locked out of the PlayStation network. Sony's typical response to whitelist hacks has generally been to release firmware updates that prevents users from installing them. That's the key problem with these hacks, and why Sony can easily prevent them from being installed. They need to be installed on the system itself. To prevent these whitelist hacks from being disabled, we need to install them outside the PSTV, and that's where the latest whitelist hack comes in. Last February, a member of Team Molecule, who answers to the name of Yifanlu, released PSVimgTools. His program essentially allows you to manually rewrite the codes of your QCMA Vita memory card backups, and then restore this modified backup to your PSTV's memory card. And obviously, this method allows you to install the whitelist hack. And because it simply involves making alterations to backups of your PSTV's memory card rather than the PSTV software itself, this exploit cannot be blocked with firmware updates. Of course, the rewriting of the codes is not as user-friendly as the previous whitelist hacks. In fact, to be honest, one of the reasons it took me this long to get around making this video was because I kept getting stuck trying to rewrite the codes. Fortunately, there is now an easier way to install the hack. In March, a hacker by the name of SilicaAndPina released a PSVimgTools front-end version, which will allow you to use the program EasyInstallers to automatically apply the whitelist hack to the backup. For those interested in installing the hack, I recommend Skullator's excellent video showing exactly what you need to do. But the long and short of it is, you make a backup of your PSTV using Vita Update Blocker and QCMA. Then you use EasyInstallers to patch said backup with the Whitelist app. Then you simply restore the backup to your system. I followed these steps exactly on firmware 3.60. As I hoped, the Whitelist hack worked brilliantly. In fact, it works better than previous versions. Whereas HENkaku needed to be reinstalled every time you powered on the console, and Mr. Gases could be disabled simply by refreshing the live area, the PSVimgTools Whitelist seems to be permanently fixed. I can turn the console off and on again without any need to reinstall. I then updated my PSTV to firmware 3.65. I expected updating it to erase the Whitelist hack, but it didn't. All my blacklisted games work fine. Uncharted Golden Abyss booted up, Spy Hunter booted up, Wipeout 2048 booted up, Crazy Market booted up, you name it. I then installed Sword Art Online Hollow Realization, which required firmware greater than 3.60 to load. Even after installing the game and playing it on the PSTV, my blacklisted game still functioned. I then tried downloading apps from the PlayStation Store. The blacklisted game still worked. I then updated my Vita to 3.65 and swapped the memory card out between my PSTV and my Vita and back again. The Whitelist still worked. I am yet to find anything that will disable the PSVimgTools Whitelist hack. And even if I do, it's very simple to back up the memory card again and reinstall the Whitelist, especially since the PSVimgTools option works on any firmware. My PlayStation TV is currently on firmware 3.67, the latest firmware, and the PSVimgTools Whitelist hack is still working flawlessly. This application works so well with blacklisted games that it should be a standard feature. I currently own 14 physical blacklisted Vita games and 5 digital blacklisted games. Crazy Market is built around the Vita's touchscreen, but it is perfectly playable using a DualShock 4's touchpad or the DualShock 3's thumbsticks, although some levels do get a bit harder. Likewise, Wipeout 2048 only uses the Vita's touchscreen for the menus, but again, you can easily navigate them using the controller's touch pointer emulation. Gravity Rush uses the Vita's gyro to operate Cat as she floats through the air, but it is more of an optional feature. You can also use the thumbsticks to orientate her, so just use those when playing the PSTV. XCOM Enemy Unknown Plus plays fine, and I can't imagine why it wouldn't. It's a PlayStation 3 port. Adventures of Mana plays exactly like a cross between Zelda and Final Fantasy. Now it does use the touchscreen for on-screen buttons. You can use the touch pointer emulation to access them, but since they've also been mapped to the X and circle buttons, there's no need to. As for physical games, the only two I've run into with problems are Uncharted Golden Abyss and Tearaway. As stated in my previous video, Uncharted Golden Abyss is a perfectly playable game on the PlayStation TV, except for stages that require you to get past the logs. These moments require the Vita's gyroscope for balance. If you try to pass them on the PlayStation TV, you'll just fall off the log and die. It doesn't matter whether you use the PS3 or PS4 controller, you just fall off the log and die, regardless of which controller you use. But it is not a hopeless cause. While it may seem like a nuisance, it is possible to simply pop the game cartridge and memory card out of the PSTV and swap them into the Vita to get past incompatible levels. And then swap them back into the PSTV, provided the two consoles are on the same firmware, of course. Many levels are perfectly playable. The only levels that require the Vita are those with the logs or narrow walkways, moments that use the Vita's gyroscope.
We're not making much headway! Faster! Faster!
Yeah, that's what she said.
I'll lead!
Look, I'm going as fast as I can.
Yeah, that's what you told her.
Interestingly, I got up to the stage that uses the Vita's camera. You are prompted to point the Vita's camera at a light source. For reasons unknown, when I got to that stage on the PSTV, the light meter shot all the way up to 100%, as though I was already pointing it at a light. I have no idea how I did that. I have no idea what happened. I just know that it worked. And yes, I was able to beat the entire game on the PSTV, with the only assistance from the Vita being to get past those damn logs. As for Tearaway, the game just crashes whenever I try to load it. The crashing seems to be due to the game not detecting a camera. But the hacking community has released programs to fix these issues. There is Fake Camera, which tricks the game into thinking that the camera is connected, and DS Motion, which enables the motion controls to be simulated using the DualShock controller. However, to the best of my knowledge, these programs can only be installed on Firmware 360. At least there is a PS4 port if you want to play Tearaway on TV. Speaking of the Vita's camera, Spy Hunter uses the Vita's camera to take a photo of yourself when starting a new campaign. But it is possible to start a campaign with a blank image, so this is not a game-breaking thing. There are also moments when the game uses touchscreen buttons.
Intel acquired.
But you can easily use a DualShock 3's touch pointers or a DualShock 4's touchpad to access them. In fact, with the exception of Uncharted Golden Abyss and Tearaway, all the blacklisted games I've played work just fine. Unit 13 is perfectly playable using the DualShock 4's touchpad for touchscreen buttons. LEGO Legends of Chima Larval's Journey plays exactly like LEGO Star Wars on the PS2.
Batter up!
The Australian release of Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc is perfectly playable, and there is no reason why it should be blacklisted. The NTSC versions of this game are even on the PSTV's whitelist, so why not the PAL version? Similarly, Soul Sacrifice was only blacklisted outside Japan, and as you can see, the PAL version is perfectly playable with the whitelist hack installed. Ratchet & Clank Trilogy was released on the Vita, but only the first game in the collection was officially whitelisted. As you can see, with the whitelist hack, both sequels are perfectly playable. And why shouldn't they be? Why are any Ratchet & Clank games blacklisted? They were originally intended to be played on the PlayStation 2, which was intended to be hooked up to a television. Lumen's Electronic Symphony plays exactly like Tetris. I can't imagine why it would be blacklisted in PAL regions. As for the others, Metal Gear Solid HD Collection plays fine, World of Final Fantasy plays fine, Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified plays fine, Asphalt Ignition plays fine. In fact, it plays exactly like Burnout on the PS2. Even Hot Shots Golf World International plays fine. In fact, it plays much better than Wii Sports.
Well done! I'm good.
Other than Tearaway, I am yet to find any crippled Vita game. So while Sony has not answered our cries for 100% Vita compatibility, we now have a whitelist that won't force us to be locked out of the online services. With some compatibility issues aside, we can now play any blacklisted Vita game to completion or near completion. We can play Vita games that require later firmware. We can access the PlayStation Store to purchase games directly. We can sync our trophies. And for those who don't like the DualShock 4, we can even use the PSTV as exactly what Sony marketed as: a streaming device for your PlayStation 4 remote play. Remember how gimmicky you thought that was? Why would I pay $100 just so I can stream my PS4 to another television? Well, now the PlayStation TV gets the last laugh. While this feature was intended for streaming your PlayStation 4 footage to a HD TV in a different room, Setting up the PlayStation TV and PlayStation 4 to the same television is probably more worthwhile for those who don't like the DualShock 4. While this controller makes touch-based games a lot easier to play, I have to say that I think the DualShock 3 is the more comfortable controller. And it just so happens the PSTV is compatible with both. So if you don't like playing PS4 with its intended controller, just turn on your PSTV, go into the PS4 Link application using a DualShock 3, and voila! If playing PS4 games with a PS3 controller is wrong, I don't want to be right. And in the long run, the PS4 Remote Play is probably what will keep the Vita alive. While Sony has discontinued the PlayStation TV in Japan, and they have long since been sold out in Australia, surprisingly, it is still going strong in the United States. It's still listed on Sony's website, and you can even buy it in stores for about $20 a piece, possibly cheaper. Still, Sony seems to have almost completely given up on the Vita. Most new Vita games are third-party titles. In fact, in Australia, I am hard-pressed to find any Vita games in store. But nonetheless, almost all new PS4 games support the Remote Play app. I've even found some games that do support it, despite not being listed as such, like No Man's Sky. The idea is that you'll be playing your PS4 games at home on TV. Then, if you need to leave the house, you can take your Vita on the go and continue playing your PlayStation 4 games remotely. While this requires a good Wi-Fi connection, for all intents and purposes, PS4 Remote Play on the Vita offers the exact same service that Nintendo is hyping with their new Switch console. While in the past I have touted the Vita as a means of enabling the PS4 to compete with the Wii U gamepad, I have to admit, the Wii U gamepad proved to be little more than a gimmick, and the Wii U itself didn't sell very well. To try and make up for the commercial failure that was the Wii U, Nintendo tried to fully bridge the gap between home consoles and portable gaming by releasing the Nintendo Switch. All it is just a gaming tablet that can be plugged into a dock, output into a TV, or taken on the go with controllers attached. While this video is not a review or a critique of the Switch, many have complained about poor battery life, being too bulky to be portable, or poor build quality, such as easily scratching the screen trying to dock it. But the real deal breaker should be the fact that, unless there are some Nintendo exclusives that you want to play, the Switch has no value. All the third-party titles available on it, or being released to it, are either already available on the PS3 or PS4, or are going to be released on the PS4. And keep in mind, almost all of them will support the Remote Play feature. I guarantee, if there are any third-party games coming to the Switch, you can get them on the PS4 and Remote Play them on the Vita, and ultimately get the exact same experience that Nintendo is offering with the Switch. And that will ultimately be what keeps the Vita alive. As long as Sony combats Nintendo by giving us the Remote Play option, the Vita will still be around. Which means third-party developers will continue to make games for the Vita. And thanks to the hacking community, we will be able to play almost all of those Vita games on television using the PSTV. My salute goes out to Mr. Gas and his old fail-mail hack, Team Molecule and their HENkaku service, and now Yifanlu for his PSVimgTools, and SilicaAndPina for his EasyInstallers front-end version. You have all helped expand the PSTV's library by many orders of magnitude, and now, no matter what firmware we are on, despite the occasional compatibility issues, the ability to play almost all Vita games on television is now readily available to everyone.